So this is the DNS Security class, and this is the last lecture. It's a short-term class. It only goes to verse 6 weeks. This is the last lecture. I'll have one more class, and all I'm going to do is answer questions that come up. No new material. And the final exam is available starting next week for a week. So that's it. And so what I want to do today is talk about Chapter 5 and a little bit about DNSSEC. I'm not going to cover the whole DNSSEC chapter exactly for reasons I'll explain. The first thing is to protect your DNS server. So one thing is to prevent denial of service attacks. There have been a few denial of service attacks, and so you have to have a network distributed system. You have to have some way where there are multiple servers, and when one server goes down, the others take over for it. And there are various ways to do it. Now, you can do it with a load balancer and have multiple servers at one company, but for DNS servers that are used by a large portion of the world, you want a more robust system than that, so you get a network distributed system that has multiple servers in different networks. So if one network goes down, the other network can take over, like two different internet service providers like Comcast and AT&T. And then for really powerful systems, you get geographically distributed systems like what Google has, where there are just servers all over the world. So even if a whole country was to go down, you'd still have servers to provide service. And so there's various ways to do it. One way is to host your authoritative servers at a large company that has these content distribution networks, like an ISP or content distribution network like Actibuy that exist for this. The other thing is purchase caching acceleration service and send your DNS records, delegate them to someone else who will then have this other server that is more powerful. But the problem is then the requests still come to your authoritative server to get the referral. And your authoritative server might get overwhelmed and not be able to provide those referrals. And then there's direct delegation. This is what a Cloudflare uses. This is what I use. I had to make Cloudflare my authoritative DNS server. So all my DNS records are on the Cloudflare network. I do not have my own DNS server at all. And therefore, my page will stay up as long as Cloudflare stays up, and they are very big and powerful, and that's a whole lot better than any servers I'm going to be able to buy or rent. And this is good for most companies. So the other technique of delegation, you'd have your own server, you would ask for it, and instead of giving it an IP address, you'd give it a forwarding to the caching server, which will then cache it and handle all the load here. But the problem is that means some requests do come to you, and therefore, if this server can be flooded and taken down, that will deny service to some of your customers, and especially when the cache empties. So those are the general ways you can do it. And there used to be a project, I might still have it, protecting a domain with Cloudflare, I'm not sure. Anyway, I think I may not have any more because I think there are no more free domains. But anyway, if you have a real domain name, it's free to put it behind Cloudflare, and I recommend it. So Cloudflare uses Anycast. The root of DNS does. This is the way to do it. You have multiple servers widely dispersed, and they have the same IP address. So traffic is sent to the nearest one by Border Gateway Protocol, which can handle that, and automatically that will happen. So if one of them goes down, the traffic will just be automatically routed to the ones that are still up. And nobody can direct attack traffic at any one of them without directing the attack at all of them. So you can't take them down until you have enough traffic to take them all down. And as Cloudflare has reported for the last several years, the largest DDoS attacks are now as big as the internet can deliver, and they can withstand that. So there's no way to actually deliver a big enough attack to take them down with a volumetric attack. However, layer 7 DOS, you can never be safe from. Layer 7 DOS are where you customize traffic to take down one server. Now, if you send something generic, like just pings or TCP SYNs, that's a volumetric attack. You have to flood the network to where it doesn't respond anymore. That will just kill everything at that IP address. But if you really just want to take down a server, like say a City College server, let me bring it up for an example. If you go to like ccsf.edu, you could try to take this down by just flooding it with pings or TCPs, and then you'd have to get so many that the server can't handle it. But if you want to be a volumetric attack, you do something like find a search page and then search for something that's going to have a lot of hits, like tuition or something. And now this one request gives you a whole page of results, and it costs them a lot of CPU. So you make many, many of these requests looking for that. You find something where a small request costs them a lot of CPU, and then you flood it with that. And now you do not need to deliver enough traffic to black out the communication lines, and you can bring down a server this way. This is a layer 7 DOS attack, and there is no known defense against those. These you have to defend against in a custom way. You have to notice when they're coming and block them. And this is the kind of thing that is calling for security orchestration. That's why I've been talking, I'm developing SOAR projects. This is what you would use Splunk SOAR for, to detect attacks like this and block them. And
I think in this case they might cache the results for fusion.
yeah, you might.
Generate new like
Yes, so if you cache the result, that would make you more resistant to this attack, yeah. And that's the point. You could then look for other things. But this is a deadly technique that almost every website is vulnerable. If the attacker customizes the attack for your page, they can usually find an attack that will consume a lot of resources at your end, and then you're going to have some kind of volumetric defense while it's happening. And, you know, it just depends on how much. It's the same as, in general, a targeted hack will always get through. This is why pen testers always get through. If someone's willing to research your company and try hard and customize the phishing email to refer to something that's happening at your company, like we're doing construction, that's moving parking places, open this PDF, if you customize it, you almost always get in. But if you're getting a weaker attacker that's just like renting a botnet and trying to flood large quantities of people, then you can bounce those attacks. Anyway, so that's, all right, so here's DNS delegation. If you look for my name server, they are at Cloudflare. They're not at samsclass.info. I do not run my own name servers. It just sends you to Cloudflare servers, which is complete delegation. I hand over all my DNS to them, so if they go down, my site goes down, but that way I don't have to maintain name servers and keep them up. You can also have partially hidden authoritative servers. You can do this if you want to. You can have a start of authority only for your private users and then have separate servers for the public users. And this would be a way you'd have servers which resolve names inside your network for your own employees to reach things. And then you have separate servers outside, which are run by someone else. So you'd separate those jobs. And that way, these ones out here on the internet, where the whole world can get at them, would be at some strong place like Cloudflare where they can handle an attack. These are only accessed by your own employees, and therefore they don't need to be so powerful. And Ultra DNS is another one that does this. They have private node deployments and public servers, and you subscribe to their service and then rent servers in various locations to protect them. It is a big deal. Many, many internet attacks involve taking down DNS. Not for the node root of the DNS, but for one particular company. It's a common thing that gets attacked. Also, software has vulnerabilities. Bind is the standard, and there used to be another one called GJB DNS, but it seems to be abandoned. But there are many others. But whatever you use, you have to keep it updated because people keep finding vulnerabilities in it. What's that? Bind is the server software that you run on Linux. Oh. It was the original DNS server software, and a lot of people still use it. Well, Log4j is a different product. That's Log4Java. So it applies on Java servers. And it had vulnerabilities, serious ones, a few years ago. It got us all in a lot of trouble. And Bind had a lot of serious vulnerabilities years ago, but they patched those, and the latest vulnerabilities have been less severe. Then, okay, so then we should talk about DNSSEC. DNSSEC is a lot like IP version 6. It's very complicated, very expensive, a lot of work to put up, and at the end, no apparent benefit really. If you don't put in IP version 6 and keep using IP version 4, your customers can still get in. So most management says, why do we even bother? The only reason anybody bothers is because we actually ran out of IP version 4 addresses a few years ago. So you have to buy used IP addresses that are a bit expensive. And if you want to deploy a lot of things, like when the telephone, AT&T, the companies wanted to deploy cell phones. I think Comcast, when they wanted to put out cell phone service, there were not enough IP version 4s, so their cell phones are actually connected over IPv6 only. And they tunnel the IPv4 over IPv6. So they finally did. The original IP version 6 was created in '93 because they saw that the internet would start running out of addresses around this time, and they planned to completely deploy it by the year 2000, but everybody just ignored it and did not deploy it at all until around 2018, because there wasn't really an emergency. And DNSSEC is the same. DNSSEC solves the cache poisoning attack, which Dan Kaminsky created in 2008, and all similar attacks. But there was a temporary, simpler solution to randomize the source port, which in fact lowered the consequences of that attack down to an acceptable level, so most everybody just is not bothering to go to DNSSEC. DNSSEC does not do anything other than stop those cache poisoning attacks. It does not provide privacy for your end users or protect you from denial of service or anything else that really matters, so it's a whole lot of work to configure this complicated stuff which causes your servers to work a lot harder to deliver these big responses for no apparent benefit, so it has been really slow to roll out. And here's what you get. You get the authenticity of the origin. So if you want to know where a Yahoo server is, there's a signature so you can verify that really came from the official Yahoo server, not from anybody else. And then you have integrity of the data. So nobody can lie about your responses. So that does seem like a good thing, but it's done in a cryptographic, expensive way. You have this resource record signature, and you have a chain of trust, just like HTTPS, where this signature is signed by an intermediary, and that's signed by another one, and at the top is the root of the DNSSEC tree, which is maintained through a sort of religious ritual. The root of DNS is signed with a private key, and its integrity is verified every year at a ritual where celebrities have been chosen, something like 10 of them, with fractions of the key on USB sticks, and they meet in a physical location and put their sticks together and verify that no one has tampered with the root once a year in sort of a ceremony. That's what happens, because they don't want to trust any certificate authority or anything. That's the root. All trust comes from that. So anyway, that's the game. And so you have something like this. You have IETF key signed by .org, .org signed by root, and the root is self-signed. And it's verified through this quasi-religious process I described. And that's the chain of trust.
But
yeah.
Who manages that? Who runs this root?
Well, the root servers are run by the 13 root servers are run, I think, by ISPs, essentially, by big companies. But they're signed with a key which is verified.
Internet providers?
What's that?
Internet providers? ISP. Internet providers?
Yes, I think tier 1 ISPs are the main people that run them all. I'm not entirely sure, actually. It's a good question. You can Google them. I don't really know the answer. It'd be one of the basic, big companies, I would think. And so here's the details, Chain of Trust. You have example.net here. It's got a resource record signature and then a key, and that goes up to this one, and this key, and up to here. That's just records. All right. The root was signed in 2010. So it's been 13 years when the root was signed, and that made it possible to deploy DNSSEC. And the idea of the designers, of course, is we'll deploy it everywhere and actually get it down into your browser. So when your browser gets a DNS record, you will verify it cryptographically. Now, that is not happening anywhere. There are no browsers that are verifying it because not enough companies are providing this information, so there's no point. And it's not going to, this is one of the huge problems. Until like 99% of websites are signed, you can't benefit from it, because if your browser rejected things that weren't signed, you couldn't use the internet. Valid sites would not be there. So until everybody does it, nobody can do it. So all that's happening now is the traffic above your browser among the servers, some of that is signed and verified. But to verify it to the end, you'd have to have essentially universal deployment of it. And that does not seem to be coming anytime soon, maybe never. There's serious arguments now that DNSSEC is just not worth the bother at all, and we should just forget it. So anyway, you can do it all with the dig command. You can watch it. IETF is signed, so you can dig for the resource record signature at the root and get the signature of the root here. The resource record signature is this long base 64 stuff, and then you can get the DNS key record up there, and then you can get the .org. You can get the response here, and it will include a DNS key and an RRSIG. So it's got a signature and a key also. And so you can find all these things, and then you can do cryptographic operations on them to verify all that. And that's what servers do if they're have DNSSEC on them, which is pretty expensive. It's a lot of network traffic and a lot of processing. And so you can see in 2013, some 300 top-level domains had it, then more and more. It's now up to like 90% of top-level domains are signed. So you can verify the top-level domain, like .org and .net. But most companies are not signed. And so here's an article I found, a very recent article from this year, saying, is DNSSEC a good idea? Or is it nothing more than a whole lot of effort for nothing? If people are beginning to lean towards it's not even worth bothering. I notice right now, in 2023, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft have not signed their domains. That's a bad sign. If it was worth doing, they would do it. Even the banks haven't. Bank of America, HSBC, and BNP Paribas, largest banks in the world, have not signed their domains. So this seems to be going nowhere. And that's an issue. That's why I'm not emphasizing it so much anymore. This was, I was a big proponent of IP version 6, and IP version 6 did roll out. DNSSEC was a similar idea from a similar time, but it does seem to be more bother than it's worth. And there are people saying, for more than 10 years, we should just forget it, and these voices are sort of growing. So I think realistically, unless somebody finds another major way to hack things, that this would stop, there's just not much momentum to do it. So Cloudflare will do it for you, though, just like I get HTTPS from Cloudflare and I get denial of service protection from Cloudflare, you can turn on DNSSEC at your Cloudflare. You don't have to figure out how to deploy it or anything. If you're willing to use their proxy service, they'll turn it on for you. So that would seem to help, but in fact, most people just don't bother. So I think that means my domain is signed. More than Amazon or Bank, probably. I haven't checked, but I guess mine would be signed. That's interesting. I wonder if that works. Let me see if I can do that. I hadn't thought of that, but if I do clear, I might have some of these resource record signatures on my domain just from using Cloudflare. I think probably not, though. I think I would have to turn them on. If I do an A record for samsclass.o.info, I've got two IP version 4 records, and if I do IP version 6, I've got 2 of them because Cloudflare does that for you. And if I do name servers, there they are, they're Cloudflare servers. But if I do resource record signature, which is what I'd have if I had DNSSEC implemented, I don't have them. Okay, I'm not surprised. But I think it's an option, and I could turn it on in the Cloudflare portal. I just haven't because it doesn't matter, but anyway, that would be an easy way. And so there is a browser extension you can put on some browsers like a Prototype to try to validate DNSSEC, and then you'll just discover that nothing you go to is signed. So you'd have to go to, I guess, the IETF.org. Like I mentioned, the IETF does have this. They're the people that sort of write this Internet Engineering Task Force. They invent all this stuff, so they kind of have, they've got resource record signatures. Now, I'm not getting it because City College is blocking it. So let's go to 1.1.1.1. There we go. And now, I'm not sure I got an answer even from there. So maybe that's the problem. Let's use a looking glass. Ring of Saturn. DNS looking glass. This will get me clean internet, not through any kind of filtering. Okay, now I can try this more. Maybe mine is signed. Let's dig rrsig at ietf.org. Okay, and I'm still not getting it. Well, that's disturbing. No answer. How about any? All right, there they are. There's a DNS key and an rrsig. Hey, that's rude. There is an rrsig, it just didn't give it to me before. I don't know why. Well, now let's see if I've got it, samsclass.info. Any seems to work, although any was supposed to be deprecated years ago. All right, there's any, and all I've got is just a few things, just a couple of name servers and hinfo. So I don't seem to have the signature turned on in my domain, but some people do. Anyway, as you can see, it's not easy to see it, it's not easy to get to it, and it doesn't do any good because your browser doesn't verify it. So it's limited. Anyway, so there's other things you can do. Now, since you realize, HTTPS, let me just point this out to be complete. So here's an HTTPS website. If you click this, you can view the security certificate. Certificate is valid. There we are. Here's the HTTPS certificate. It's got the name of the organization, a issued date, some fingerprints, and if you go to details, it's got a hierarchy. So this is signed by somebody, and there should be a tree going up to a root. I'm not seeing it here. I guess Ring of Saturn, R3, and then I guess this is the root. Ring of Saturn is signed. It's not as clear as I hoped it would be. But anyway, down here is the certificate. And in here, the point is it's got a public key. There's the public key. So you have a 2048-bit RSA key, which is the point. And all the rest of this is to prove that it really is the right key for them. But the point is this chain of hierarchy I wanted to show you. This one is signed by that one. This one is signed by that one. Let me find one that's more likely to be easier to understand. Let's take a look at mine.
What do they sign? They have to sign random things all the time, right?
They have to sign the whole thing. Let me see if I can find a better example, because that one didn't really look
If
good.
they use the same signature, the hacker can return the same signature as well, right? They have to sign.
No, here, let me,
every time.
no, the signature signed, let me get a browser that maybe is going to be more clear. Let's go to my website, shamsclass.info. Let's see if it's more clear here. That Opera browser was displaying it in a way that wasn't helping me much. Okay, this is view certificate. There we are. So here's the certificate. And so I guess it's the same thing. I didn't know this. Here's my domain, and then it's signed by this company, E1. Let's Encrypt. That's why everybody's using Let's Encrypt now. Let's Encrypt is the free service, and I didn't realize we're all using it now. So this is signed. They have their own signature and their own keys and stuff here, and they're signed by this, and this is the root. So this is the chain of trust. My domain is signed, and that means everything on this page is hashed, and that hash is signed with a private key that I don't have, and a public key that's issued publicly. So this is, if any part of this was altered, the signature would change. That's the point. And if every site is signed and the signature is different on every site. And that signature, you can...
That signature is different if you refresh page now, will it change or not?
If you what? If you go to a different page, it'll be different.
No, the same page.
Oh, if you refresh, it will not change. No, it only changes...
Then the hacker can just return the same signature. Right?
Yeah, the only thing it verifies is that you've reached this domain. It doesn't verify anything about the contents of the pages on that domain. So it just verifies that you actually reached the real samsclass.info, not a fake one.
But what I'm saying is that like, the hacker, like the middleman, can return the same signature as well.
Ah.
Different
Um,
what I'm saying, like, they sign the timestamp,
well,
let's say, timestamp.
That's interesting. They can't, but now that you mention it, I'm not sure why. Oh, I know. The key is the same, but the signature is not the same. Your browser sends a challenge. And so it is different every time. Yes, so that you're right, the signature would change. This page won't show the change, but the undergraphic, cryptographic would change. That's a very good question. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, what was the question?
The question is, if I refresh this page, would the signature change? And if not, then a man in the middle could just forward it. So it does change. There's a 7-way handshake, and my browser sends up some data which is different every time. And that's important. So that you have to create a new signature based on a private key, which has to be correct, which the man in the middle doesn't have. That's really important. HTTPS defeats man in the middle attacks for that reason.
So you ever refresh to give us a use of private key to encrypt it?
Yes, it'll make a new, and in fact, if you're using TLS 1.2 or 1.3, you'll end up with a new session key for every refresh. That's forward secrecy. And that's what almost everybody's using now. In fact, Microsoft has now deprecated any version lower than TLS 1.2 on Windows. They've announced it, in a year or so they're going to enforce it. So everybody should be getting a separate session key for every session from now on.
What was Let's Encrypt?
Let's Encrypt is a free service. I think it started from the ETF or EFF. The EFF, the people that want privacy on the internet. In order to promote HTTPS and try to encourage everybody to use it, they started a service selling free HTTPS certificates. Before this, they cost like $200 or $300 a year. So a lot of people didn't want to pay for it. So they make free ones, and now their latest thing, they pushed that the free ones should all expire every 90 days. You should keep getting new ones. So now you use automatic scripts to get them, and everybody seems to have switched over to using the free ones. When they announced this service about 5 years ago, a lot of us thought they couldn't handle the load and it would go down, but that doesn't seem to have happened. So now everybody can have free HTTPS certificates all the time, and that's what everybody's using now.
So why company charge before?
Well, you can charge for something called extended validation, which is mathematically identical, but supposedly includes like detective work to notice if your company looks suspicious, like if it's known to distribute malware or in a suspicious country or something, and that is supposed to turn your padlock green so people will trust you more. So supposedly, if I go to like bankofamerica.com, they are probably not using an EFF certificate, presumably. I have to spell it better, though. Bankofamerica.com. Oh, come on.
Yeah, you can say, like, the website, for example.
There. This is probably an extended validation certificate. Let's take a look. Trust, maybe it's this, yeah, okay. Certificate issued to Bank of America. More information, okay. View certificate, there. Yep, they're not using that. They paid for Entrust to use, which is an older system. And I don't know how you can tell it's an EV certificate. It probably is. They charge more for those, and they turn the button green in like at least some browsers, so my Firefox on the Mac is not showing it. But that's the issue. This is an old-fashioned chain, going to one of the original like 100 trusted routes.
What is EV certificate?
Extended validation. And what it means is they do supposedly some check to make sure you're a legitimate company. Like make sure you have a business license, make sure you're not in certain countries they don't like, that sort of thing. So hopefully they can trust you more. And they charge a lot more for them, like $500 a year.
So EFF is not checking all these?
No, no. EFF, you can just run a script and automatically get it. They just want everything encrypted and privacy. They do not do any of that because they're sort of, they're sort of hippies. They just think everybody should be encrypted. They are not making judgments about the legitimacy of your company. Whereas these guys, the extended validation, just make the usual assumptions. We like big corporations, we like rich companies, and we hate certain countries and political organizations and stuff we don't like. So they're much more like establishment, corporate.
Who sponsors Let's Encrypt? Like if no one is paying, then who's...
Let's Encrypt, I think, is run by the EFF, or a partner of the EFF, which is basically a liberal activist group that it's like the ACLU. It's a political group to promote freedom on the internet and privacy.
Running by like donations and like...
Yeah, people donate to it, yeah.
ACLU give some money to it.
Yeah, a lot of companies donate. They're always raising funds, yeah. Yeah, let me go look at the comments, because I'm sure this discussion has provoked some comments. What kind of integrity security does DNS ensure? Yeah, we've talked about this. In fact, that's why I brought this up. DNSSEC DNSSEC is sort of more designed by liberals and hippies, and SSL is more designed by corporate people. So HTTPS, the ultimate thing you're trusting is the certificate authorities at the top. And the certificate authorities are big corporations. And the only reason you trust them is because their only business is selling these certificates, and therefore they have a financial incentive not to get hacked. But that has been betrayed many times, just like trusting an insurance company or any other large company. Several times they've been caught selling root certificates to private people. In fact, this is so common that the police, you can go to a police equipment company, you can buy HTTPS interceptors, a router with a USB port, and they say, plug in your root certificate here, which they don't explain how to get, and now you can man in the middle HTTPS. And it's been known for years that corporations do the same thing. They put a firewall on the edge of the network and they break all the HTTPS connections because they have a root certificate. And this means the service providers do sell root certificates to other people, which violates the entire trust model. This has been an open secret in the business for years. And in fact, about 8 years ago, one of them announced publicly, we are no longer going to sell root certificates to third parties. And there was a huge uproar on the Mozilla mailing list saying, you rotten bums, we're going to take you out of the list. They say, no, listen more carefully. You should take everybody else off the list. They're all selling root certificates to police agencies and everybody, and we're the only ones that are not going to do that anymore. So the fundamental trust, this whole point of this chain of trust is, how do I know this is Bank of America? Well, I know because Entrust L1M said so. Well, how do I know these guys are who they say they are? The root said so, and the root is built into my browser by the people that wrote my browser. They wrote the cryptographic identifiers of the 100 people they trust, which are the roots. So these people are the ultimate repository of trust in HTTPS, and that is something you could worry about. It has turned out not to be as true that you can trust them as it should be. So the alternative is DNS. DNS does not use this system. In the DNS system, you have the signatures down here. Example.net is signed, and the reason you trust them is because .org signs that, and the reason you trust .org is because the root signed that, and the reason you trust the root is because a group of 7 or 10 celebrities meet and have a public ritual every year saying nobody has changed the key on the root. And so it's a whole different philosophy.
I thought this page and the other page were the same.
They are the same, essentially. Yeah, there's just more details.
No, I mean this and the one in the...
No, this one is different.
I thought it was the same.
they're not the same. This is HTTPS. HTTPS is what secures web traffic. The DNS system is similar mathematically, but the fundamental concept of who you trust is different. And it's not tied to corporations or money or anything. So there are people who think we should not use this system anymore. We should just use DNSSEC to sign everything, including web traffic. You could do that. These systems do accomplish the same essential goal, and that's what DANE is, which is what I wanted to make here. But let me go back and see if I got more comments here. Haven't you easily hacked bank mobile apps? I have hacked bank mobile apps, but I did not defeat HTTPS. When I hacked the app, I could make a fake banking app that would take an extra copy of your password or credit card number and put it somewhere so I could steal it, but it was still interacting with the same server. And I faulted them because they shouldn't allow that, but they do. So I didn't defeat HTTPS mathematically. All I did was find another weak spot. SSL is basically for encrypting two-way packet communication. That's correct. DNSSEC offers integrity at the domain level since there's no feedback loop to verify the authenticity of domains. That's right. The purpose of DNSSEC was to verify DNS requests and DNS replies, so you know which reply actually came from the trusted server instead of having to guess and base it on something that could be guessed by an attacker. So it prevents the cache poisoning attack. That's all it was intended to do. But in order to do that, they had to create this chain of trust and this cryptographic signature, which is essentially duplicating the same thing as HTTPS. So DNS would make blue team instant response difficult. Yes, this is a very common thought. Even encrypted DNS will do that. There's a lot of blue teams that rely on DNS monitoring, which is a very powerful technique like we've talked about. If you just record all the, if you block public DNS servers and you tell everybody you have to use our company's official DNS server, which is something you probably want to do, then you can record all the traffic coming into your DNS server. And if you record it on the wire, it's unencrypted, so now you know what everybody's doing. You know which station went to which domain at which time, so you can easily see who's infected with malware and they're going to a malicious domain, who's playing games, who's viewing porn. You know, you can totally see what everybody's doing. It's great. And a lot of people said when we switched to encrypted DNS requests, they would lose that ability to monitor. Now, I don't think so, because if you ran your own server, you could just look at the server logs where the data is and force them to send encrypted requests to your server. That's probably the best thing. But what people were used to was just monitoring all the port 53 traffic, and then even if you use external services, I can still see everything because nothing was encrypted.
DNSSEC encrypts the DNS request as well?
No, it doesn't. That's why it's kind of useless. The thing that encrypts the DNS request, there are various services, but the one that is most popular is DOE, DNS over HTTPS. That is the one that's most popular, and that's getting built into most browsers now. It's in Edge, and it's in Firefox, and I think it's now in Chrome. You can ask it to use encrypted DNS requests. And there are big public DNS servers that allow you to do this, like Cloudflare and others. So you can encrypt your DNS requests now, although it's done in a way that really offends the Internet Engineering Task Force, because they like the OSI model. And running DNS over HTTPS completely perverts the OSI model. HTTPS is a layer 7 protocol. DNS is like a layer 4 protocol. So making it, if you think about it, it's not logical. In order to make an HTTPS connection, you have to send a 7-way handshake to the server to exchange the certificate and stuff. Well, how do you do all that? You do it by making DNS requests, and those are not encrypted. So you have to start with unencrypted DNS requests to set up the tunnel, then you can use it for after that point. So it's very far from a mathematical, pure, clean system. It's sort of a clunky, clumsy kludge.
Well, like DNS uses HTTP?
What's that?
DNS uses HTTP.
DNS uses UDP, layer 4, not HTTP. But DNSSEC uses HTTPS. So logically, you can't.
What about VPN?
What's that? Well, a VPN is another interesting option. However, if you think about VPN servers, they also have domain names. So how do you find the VPN server? Well, you have to make a DNS request before the VPN is set up.
Yeah, but it's like you connect to VPN and then what you search won't be...
Well, that's actually another nasty thing. You might imagine that you only have to leak a few DNS requests to connect to the VPN server and no more after that. That is not true. In practice, 90% of VPNs continue to use unencrypted DNS outside the server forever, which is how they block it here. That's why I found when I tried to use VPNs to connect to Azure servers or RDP on City College campus, I couldn't do it through any VPN at all. except the only one that worked was S-Shuttle because none of them actually moved the DNS through the VPN, and City College blocked Azure at the domain name. So it's an open secret. People have replied this many times. If you run a VPN on your phone, it's not protecting you as much as you think it is. The DNS traffic is going outside the VPN, and it's unencrypted typically. So people can't see your email and the contents of the web pages, but they can see what domains you're going to. That's why most VPN providers do not provide a really secure VPN.
DNS requests are still processed from your phone, not through your VPN?
They do not go through the VPN. And this is true of like 90% of them. It's very hard. The only one I could find anywhere that actually does it is S-Shuttle, which is a command line tool that only runs on Linux. And you can actually move that's the S-Shuttle is the only VPN I found that you can actually connect to Azure servers with RDP on City College campus now. All the rest are blocked. And you shouldn't be able to block anything if I have a VPN. If I can make the VPN connection, you shouldn't be able to block any content, but they can because they block the DNS requests. These are very good questions. Let's see what else here. Yep, that's right. DNS or HTTPS is the privacy solution. Anyway, so the reason I brought up all this stuff about HTTPS is for two good reasons. But the first one is DANE. DNS-based authentication of named entities. There are people who say, you know, I really don't like this HTTPS thing that ends at these certificate authorities that are a bunch of evil corporations that have been caught doing nasty things. I'd rather trust the DNS route. And you can sign your websites with certificates based on the DNS route instead of the certificate authorities at the root of HTTPS. That's DANE. People like this, and in principle, you could configure your browser to accept these, but it has not taken off in practice. There's a whole bunch of open source hippies, non-corporate types that would like to do this. They really don't like the monetary-based system, but they haven't gained much traction yet. There are various movements. For example, the United States, about 10 years ago, France legalized file sharing. So you can go in France and download copyrighted movies and music, and that's legal. And the American recording industry got really mad because people were making pirate copies of music in France. And they said, if you do a DNS request to find the server you're downloading it from, that goes through a DNS server in the United States. And therefore, we are claiming jurisdiction that we can prosecute people in France who are doing something that's legal in France because the traffic passed through some of our servers from DNS. And that made some people so mad, they said we're going to make a European alternative to DNS that is not controlled by the United States. And then they talked about maybe putting it on a blockchain or something, but again, that never really happened. This is a huge problem, by the way, in Europe. Europe does not have much in the way of free services like Google and Gmail and all the Microsoft cloud services and everything. If they want to do anything on the internet, they pretty much have to use American services, but they have no privacy in America. The government can just totally spy on anything a foreigner does here. They explicitly have no protection at all, and the NSA spies on everything, which totally violates European privacy law. So Europeans keep passing a temporary law. First it was called the Safe Harbor Act, and now they passed another version that gives an exception to European privacy laws for American companies and various activists in Europe keep saying, we're going to make our own Microsoft, our own Google, so we don't have to keep using American stuff, but they don't have any way to make it. It's not as good, it's not as cheap. So all the European data keeps being on American servers, even though it violates European law, and they keep having special exceptions to work around it. This is a big problem. And you know, now the European privacy laws are beginning to affect American companies. They're beginning to obey some of the privacy laws. The big example is the iPhone is now going to have a USB-C port, the new one, because Europe demanded it. And also, now California passed a privacy law to match the European privacy law, so Google is trying to change their cookies so they don't know everything about you anymore. So it is gradually happening that the privacy rules are coming up, starting in Europe, and then going to California, and then through other parts of the United States, until it becomes cost-effective for American companies to actually just reconfigure their stuff to snoop on you less.
Also, Google did a really interesting thing. So their maps had different domain, like maps.google.com. Like
Mac.google.com?
So like Google Maps had different.
Right, that's right.
Now they changed that maps domain to the google.com/maps.
Oh, did they?
So if you give it permission, like to use location maps, it also gives location to the Google's.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so this is another thing that exists. DANE, I don't know if it's in much use, but you could use DNS instead of HTTPS, and some people think you should. Now let me see if there's more comments in the Twitch here. All right, nothing new. All right, and so let's go on. That's another thing to know about. Then, so here's DNSSEC issues. The protocol is changing. And the main problem is it doesn't actually do anything that helps the end user. It doesn't encrypt your traffic, which is something end users would want, so people can't spy on you. So that's an issue. Now, there's another problem too. There is no fred.ccsf.edu. So how do you prove that? Now, the current system is you would go to the authoritative server and ask for Fred, and you would get no answer, and that would be the end of the matter. But if all the data is encrypted and signed, you only sign the records that exist. So how do you answer the question? How do you tell it this server does not exist and have that verified? And this turned out to be much harder than you think it should be. So first they had a next record, which would list all the existing servers so you could tell it wasn't on the list. But then they said, wait, you shouldn't just tell everybody a list of all our servers. That's not right. So then they moved to NSEC, but there was still a way to determine it. So then they moved to NSEC 3, and they're all incompatible with one another. So this is one of the many reasons why people hate DNSSEC. It is really confusing and complicated, and certain things that DNS can do are very hard to do securely. And so then there's transaction signatures. These cryptographically sign the messages going back and forth, and it turns out to be pretty complicated. There's a secret key shared between two end loads that includes the time it expires. You have to generate this key secretly, securely, and securely transmit it to the other server. It is just really kind of a mess mathematically. Then the signatures originally were based on MD5, but MD5 is known to be broken and insecure, so now they use SHA. There's a whole bunch of error messages associated with this, but the error messages are unsigned because you can't sign them because you haven't got the signature working, so you can spoof the error messages and create denial of service by telling people they're errors when they aren't. So there's just a lot of thorny problems in DNSSEC, which is part of why it's still changing. And all right, there's transaction keys. It's amazingly complicated. And at the end, what do you get? You just stop that cache poisoning attack, which has already been stopped with random source. That's why a lot of people are just losing faith in DNSSEC. So anyway, you make slaves at the master, you make changes at the master, the slaves replicate. This is a system. I think they're trying to change these words to be less offensive, master and slave server. Anyway, you can configure your bind to be a slave server, where it just copies the data from another server. And now here's another issue. DNS protocol is limited to 512 bytes, the original protocol, which is only enough to move 13 A records, which is why there are 13 root name servers. But the signatures are much bigger. So you have to have extended DNS or another protocol to get there. So this is an issue. And this means if you want to do a failover by multiple name servers, it would require several records to distribute a lot of name servers. You can't put enough data in 512 bytes. ccsf.edu has 4 name servers. We still do. If you look for NS, we have 4 of them. All right. So there's ways, which is one way to provide load balancing. You have 4 servers, so if one of them goes down, you'll have another one to try. You can also have automatic failover. You have a load balancer and 2 servers, so if one fails, it moves to the other one, and the external world doesn't even know that happened. It sees only one external IP address, and it doesn't know which server you talk to. That's another way to do it. All right, so to protect your DNS service, general rules: run on a hardened system with all the patches and updates and firewalls and everything. Block the management ports of your device, so only trusted IP addresses can get there, only internal height. You have an IDS to block known attacks. You can limit traffic with an access control list in your firewall, and so on. Then you might need scrubbers. If you want to stop DDoS attacks, what you typically do is you add a scrubber. You have your normal website here. Your customer's coming in. You have your server, I guess, is here. And so people come in, normal traffic is coming into your server, and attackers, people are coming in through the same server. So your attack traffic is mixed with normal traffic. This is a problem. So to prevent this, you add a scrubber. When you're under attack, you pass your traffic through scrubbers. You can just rent like Amazon instances, and you put proxy servers on them. and then you block out the known traffic. This is why, like I mentioned, the Al-Qassam cyber army that went through a dozen rounds of DDoS attacks against many American banks to do this. They were really angry at America because there was an insulting video about Muhammad on YouTube, and they said, you must take this video off YouTube, and until you do, we're going to punish you by DDoSing your banks. And this went on for months. And so they would send traffic, and so the bank security engineers would talk to each other and figure out how to tell the attack traffic from irregular traffic. And the first wave, the attack traffic just consisted of requests that had like 100 capital A's in a row in it. So it was really easy to tell the attack traffic from normal traffic, so that's what you put on a scrubber. Before traffic comes to your company, you set up a proxy that looks for the bad stuff and throws it away and only passes the good stuff. And so as soon as you get that set up and updated with a rule that can tell good stuff from bad stuff, you clean your network. And this is what people do when they're under DDoS attack. They program a proxy server to discard that traffic, but you do have to find some way to tell the attack traffic from the good traffic. And so a more smart attacker will make traffic that is hard to discriminate from good traffic. But most of them are not that smart, and you can find ways to do it. And so you can do this, by the way, with BGP updates. You can tell BGP to send traffic not to me, but up here, which will then forward it to me. A BGP update is what you do to make this happen.
What does BGP mean?
Border Gateway Protocol is the protocol that moves traffic large distances. So if I set up a bank here, and I tell them I'm bank.com, nobody can find me until I tell the world where bank.com is. So I have and at the ISP level, this happens with Border Gateway Protocol. I announce with DNS that bank.com is at a certain IP address, and my ISP announces that that IP address is at this physical location. And that's done with Border Gateway Protocol. So the Border Gateway Protocol is how it finds the physical location of your server from the IP address. And now if I want to put something in the middle, I change just the BGP traffic, telling it to go to this location instead, which will then forward it to me. That's the point. That's why BGP is used for Anycast, and it's used to implement scrubbers. All right, these are very good points. All right, and so let me check. I think there might be more comments here. I've heard, nope, okay, good. All right, so then service monitoring, of course. You should be monitoring your DNS to make sure it's working. Send requests from various locations, making sure it's working from all the locations that matter, because it's pretty easy to kill intermediate devices, so you lose service in, say, one country or from one internet service provider. So verify this. There are a lot of tools out there that will do this, and services. I've got one, for example, on my homepage. If you go to samsclass.info, if you go to the bottom, here's my servers. It tells you which ones are up. The green ones are up, the red one is down. My Hackazon server's been down, I'll have to fix that sometime. There's a service you can sign up for that will just do this. There are tools that will just probe your service and tell you. Yeah, this is more than pinging. This is making HTTPS requests. But you can program it to do anything, DNS request, whatever you like. There's also open source software that will do this, that will just probe your shipments. This is by way called Save Your Job. If you're a server administrator, you need to do this, because if your site goes down, when your boss calls you, you want to say, I already know it and I'm on it. You don't want your customers or your boss to be the ones that tell you your server is down. You want to know if your server is down. So you want these services running that will automatically ring your phone or something, even if it's the middle of the night, so you know if the server goes down. That's it.
Can you make that little script to check the server?
I have, but in fact, this time I'm just using a service. Just there's a free service on the internet that does it. Let me see if I can find it. I forget, I don't put a link here. I forget what I use. There's a free internet service that does it. But you could also just do it with your own script. The problem is, if that server went down, I wouldn't get the reports anymore. So there's a free internet service that does it.
Your website is running PHP or something, or just HTML?
It's running PHP. Yeah, it's running on Apache, on a hosting, and it supports PHP, and that's what I use for most of my stuff. Good. All right, so then of course you have to back up your stuff. You have to back up at least the DNS configuration files. You may not need to back up the whole operating system because that's easy to restore, but you do have to have all the DNS data backed up, and your cloud servers have to be backed up, and you have to test your backups. I worked at a company one time, and it turns out when you're running a business, there are all these customer requests come in. So everybody's smart. You put them on the customer requests, and they take the idiot and put him on backups. So the idiot that was always like showing up late and smoking pot in the parking lot, they put him on backups. So for like a year, he was not actually changing the tapes. We were just recording on the same tape. Nobody knew this. So when you go for the backups, they're not there. This happens a lot. So you do have to test your backups. Make sure they're actually working, because when you need them, you'll need them. And if you don't test them, you don't really know if they're working. And then, of course, slow DNS response. If your DNS server is down, if one goes down and you have just the other server, then this will slow responses. So if you have a server that has failed, then it's best to remove the records. Because remember, if you do like a City College DNS here, if you had a server that went down, this appears in a random order. Some of your customers get this server at the top, and they're going to try that server and wait like 10 or 30 seconds before going to the next one. So if this server is down for an extended period of time, you should stop providing it as an option to your customers. You should take it out of your DNS records so you don't keep sending people to a dead server to get bad service. That's all. Okay.
How do you change the DNS records?
Oh, you have to change the zone file. The zone file lists your server, and you tell it, nope, we only have 3. Just give them 3. That's all.
Or you could, okay, or you could just have like something, I think you can just have an API gateway or something.
Well, yeah, but if this device is not available, you should not be advertising it. That's right. There are other ways to do it. All right, good. Let's try.
So when somebody look up DNS for your server, you look up your file, the config file or something?
Well, your server, as we did, the config file, you put it on there when you install the DNS server. You create the zone file. We've done it in the project.
The record file.
The what?
The record file.
Yeah, they call it the zone file, the thing that has the data that the DNS server is handing out. And so you'll have to modify that.
So the DNS servers, when people look for DNS lookups, the servers actually look up your config file?
Yes, they look at your zone. It's not a config file, it's a zone file. And so, and that's the point. You specify at your authoritative server what servers are available, and that's the master copy that everyone uses. Everybody else has just got a copy of that data. And so you have to update that data, and then it won't take effect until all the caches expire. So that's why you have to choose your caching time carefully. If your caching time is too long, for all that time, people are getting the wrong answer. But if your caching time is too short, then your server gets more load because everybody keeps coming to refresh their data. So you have to make a reasonable decision there. Good, these are all very good questions. So let's try this Kahoot. It's amazing how many problems on the internet are caused by DNS. There's a saying in the business, it's always DNS. When you have a problem, it's very, very often a problem with your DNS that causes things to go down. It's surprisingly complicated. It seems like, how hard could it be? It can get pretty hard.
Yeah, sometimes we're like, let's say Google.com, Facebook, we're down, it's like always DNS.
Yeah, this is a cliche. It's always DNS, but there's a reason for that. Oh, they might. I don't know. They might. Yeah, I haven't bothered, but they could. Yes. I know Canvas does. I actually did that for a while. I wrote my own web pages. It would automatically send the scores up to Canvas and stuff. Then I just wrote my own scoring engine, but which gets Canvas kind of sucks anyway. But I had made my own Kahoot clone for a while before this was out, but it wasn't as fun. It didn't have the pictures and music. It was just a form, you know, but not that hard to do. You can do it with PHP, but it wasn't as much fun as Kahoot. When I started teaching for remote students, that's when I did it. And it was good, but this is better. I learned this from the Air Force. The Air Force has a program called Cyber Patriot to teach high school students security, and they use Cahoots. That's to keep them fun, you know. Yeah. All right, let's give it a shot. All right, so what architecture places authoritative servers in different autonomous systems? Bunch of technical terms. Those are network distributed. Autonomous systems basically mean different ISPs. Autonomous systems are the unit of BGP. BGP doesn't get you all the way to the right server. It gets you to the right ISP, which then sorts it internally. Just like at City College, when we get mail, they just drag over a truck and put a whole box of mail at one location, and then our own staff sorts it to the buildings and stuff. So network, the autonomous systems are the entities, the nodes of the BGP network. Like you get it to Comcast, you get it to any Comcast server in there, BGP is done. Now other protocols will take it from here. So those are the autonomous systems. That's network distributed, which means even if one whole company goes down, the other company will still be up and so they'll still have service. That's the idea. All right, so what delegation system does Cloudflare use? It's direct delegation. If you have a domain name, you have to send all DNS traffic to Cloudflare. They are your DNS provider. So everybody starts by going to Cloudflare and they don't get to your site until later. So you really have to trust them. That's direct delegation, where a different company actually provides my DNS records and it doesn't pass through any of my servers until later. All right, what record provides authenticated denial of existence? This is NSEC 3, which is, I think, the most modern version of this for what it's worth. All right, and what system removes the need for certificate authorities? This is DANE. DANE signs websites with a chain of trust that leads to the root of DNS instead of to a certificate authority. It's a whole alternative system. It hasn't caught on, but it does exist.
How is it possible? How can we do this thing?
Well, you put a certificate on your website, but the chain of trust does not go to a CA that's built in your browser.
It doesn't go to .com, it directly goes to the root?
Well, it would go, yes, it would go to .com and it would go to the root. That would be the trust for your domain name for a HTTPS certificate. However, currently, like I said, currently they go to these 100 trusted certificate authorities. That's the current system. Yeah. And this is the alternative system where instead of trusting certificate authorities, you trust the root of DNS.
So the .com directly go to the root, right?
Yeah, so that's what you trust. You trust the root of DNS as the repository trust instead of trusting 100 American companies.
Like how can we do that? I mean,
it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right now, you'd have to put a special extension in your browser to have a protocol, and there'll only be a few.
You can't make it publicly trusted, right? It's like
you have to only go to certain websites that use this. That's why it exists, and people have written some software and prototypes. But like DNS Sec, it's not going to do any good until everybody does.
You have to modify your browser.
Yes, you'd have to have your browser know this. So you'd have to put on a special extension. And you'd have to only go to the sites that are using it just so that it works. It's a prototype. and it has not got wide adoption yet.
In that case, you can even like have a custom top domains, right? You can just have like dot something, something, something.
You could, yes. In principle, you could. In fact, since it's tied to DNS, it'll be the same top-level domains. But now there are a lot of top-level domains. They just approved another bunch. In fact, starting a few months ago, they've even started approving top-level domains like .zip, so they look like files. And security people are pretty upset about this. So when you see something ending in .zip, you don't know if that's a file or a domain anymore, which is actually pretty bad. It can be used for social engineering. But that's anyway, there's a lot of top-level domains now. Originally, there were only 7. Now there's hundreds. Dane is signing HTTPS certificates with a chain of trust going to the root of DNS instead of to the root of HTTPS, which is the certificate authorities. That's the idea. You know, since you're going to have trusted domain DNS signatures, why don't you just use it for all trust? That's the idea.
It's for HTTPS, not for DNS.
Dane uses DNS signatures for HTTPS. That's the idea. Otherwise, you have 2 versions of essentially the same thing. You have one chain of certificates to verify the HTTPS certificate and a different one to verify the DNS records. Why would you have both of them? Logically, you'd only need one or the other. The system that in fact has caught on is DNS over HTTPS, using HTTPS as the trusted root, but the alternative would be to use DNS as the root and no longer use the other one.
How can you use HTTPS for DNS?
You can configure it in your browser in the settings.
Yeah, you have to like first make request the handshake, right?
Yeah, it's not perfect. Yeah. In fact, there's a project. So here, let me just record these winners, and then I'll point you to these projects. So it's Luca and Car. Whoops. And the other one is Nathan. All right. All right. So I got that. And let me stop this recording.